Hetepantes. I wish I knew how to say that in Phrygian, but unfortunately it hasn't been preserved. Spoiler alert. I don't know the Phrygian word for hello. But hopefully soon, something will emerge from beneath the soil of Anatolia. All right. Now, we're a little bit behind. I'm going to move a bit more quickly through the remaining New Phrygian material. I want to get stuck into the Old Phrygian material before we break for lunch. Also, I'm happy to just go with the flow in terms of when and how we break. If people feeling really tired and want to break earlier, happy to do that. People are happy to keep going through to cover more material. I'm happy to do that as well. Feel free to just chime in if you would like to. If you'd like to sort of make a call for the group to break or keep on going or whatever. All right, now I was just saying to Maria during the break that with material, by the way, the New Phrygian corpus, unfortunately, in many cases, we don't have access to this, a photo, a recent photo of the actual inscribed material itself. For various reasons, about 80% of the New Phrygian corpus doesn't survive in the original, only in the sketches and drawings of it that epigraphers put together in often the early 20th century when they were first found. For the most part, this can be, ascribed to the cataclysms of the first two world wars. Let's remain optimistic, the two world wars. And also just issues with things like corruption in the antiquities trade. So because of that, often when we work with other New Phrygian material, we're just looking at something like this. All right, so just the printed edition, the transcription of the original. Look at the original text itself. Now, Maria asked me during the break as well, what does this mean? This means this is where the text breaks off. This is a epigraphic siglum. It means there was likely more Phrygian or Greek, more written material in antiquity, but the text broke off. And we can see that here, for example, after the end of the imprecation, the writing surface has broken off. You can see that there in the drawing. Okay, that's the E2 there. Now, in this case, I think that was all that was written down because the curse is finished. Right? We know what's going to happen to the person who violates the tomb. So probably there was a relief or something underneath this one word, E2. But often there's more text that we've lost. The case here. Let's read this second example. Now, notice that this one, it's all Phrygian. For one little word of Greek that we have left remaining. So in this case, our knowledge of Phrygian is going to have to guide us alone. Does anyone feel up to reading this Phrygian text? To me, group. I know we have some Greekists in the room. How about some Phrygianists, budding Phrygianists? Right, I'll jump in, but there's plenty more opportunities. I want to hear some of us speaking some Phrygian soon. Let us keep this language alive. All right. So, Yos semin knumani urun daket aini kakunkin. Titetik menos atie aditu. And then what's just left, this little nugget of the Greek, Domnos, the name, some guy called Domnos. And we don't know really whatever happened to Domnos. Presumably he's dead, because this is on a tomb. All we can really say. Okay, Yos. We're familiar with now. Yos, this is the Greek relative pronoun, who, nominative masculine singular. Semin here, all right? We have the same word as semun from the previous inscription, all right? So this is tomb. Now, this is this is accusative. I'll write that down in my notes. No, I did because we had the accusative last time. Very good. It's an accusative form. Sorry, did I say tomb? My apologies. This is our demonstrative. Sorry, my 3 hours of sleep last night is starting to catch up with me. This is our demonstrative, and it's agreeing again with knumane. Now, note that here we don't have the final iota, the dative singular ending, but this is the same construction. Yos semin knumane, the same as semun knumane of the previous inscription. Whoever, this is tomb. Notice we don't have the indefinite particle here in this instance. Daket. All right, so here we have the same verb form as adaket. In this instance, we don't have the preverb ad. Okay? we can see it doesn't really affect the meaning, as we'll see from our translation. So the ad was sort of optional by this stage in Phrygian. It had lost its own sort of semantic force. Darket and darket, they both mean close to or to. Now we have two coordinated accusative objects here. So this is our dative to this tomb or on this tomb, to this tomb. This is our verb, places. This is our subject, whoever, and these are our two coordinated objects, murun and kakun. Now we've already met kakun, we know what that means. Murun, well, this is a substantive use of a Phrygian adjective which would have meant stupid. It's either a loan word from Greek moros or a Phrygian cognate of the same word. So we have kakun, a wicked thing, and we have murun, a stupid thing. Now we have two extra words here to do. We have aini and kin. The ni here is fused to the I. These have become one word, but it's the same particle that we saw after the yos before, making it indefinite. I here is the Phrygian reflex of Greek a, if. They both come from a Proto-Indo-European form, chei. All right. So this is essentially the Phrygian equivalent of the Greek construction ean. Here it's coordinating, as a sense, or. It's coordinating these two objects. Yosemun knumani murun darket. Whoever places a stupid act on this tomb, aini or kakun kin. A wicked act, kin, this is a neuter indefinite pronoun. So this is making the kakun indefinite, some kind of wicked act. Now, kin here, it's from the Proto-Indo-European indefinite pronoun, some of which is quo or qui. So we still see the form with the over-vocalization in a Phrygian nominative singular form of this word kos. But a good way to think of this word is it's actually very productive in other descendant languages. For example, the qu in Proto-Indo-European became a t in many dialects of Greek. So Greek tis is cognate with, or tis tina is cognate with Indo-European kin. But some other words that you might recognize that are more similar in form. Well, this is cognate with Latin quid and Sanskrit kim. All right, so this Proto-Indo-European indefinite pronoun was highly productive and led to indefinite pronouns quite a few descendant languages. All right, which I think is wonderful. And then we get same apodosis. Titetikmanos at tie aditu. There's some variations. Titetikmanos here is the same, but here we have tie indicating an agent, but we have the preposition at, meaning at or by, here indicating an agent. It's cognate with English at, by the way, at, and with Latin ad. It's from Proto-Indo-European head. Aditu here, once again, we have the imperative verb itu that we saw in the previous text, but here we have the preverb ad added to it. It seems to just be a very flexible verb that can be added, preverb that can be added to verb stems in New Phrygian. It doesn't really change the meaning. So, yosemin knumani murun daket aini kakunkin. Whoever does a stupid act to this tomb or some kind of evil act, let them be judged by Zeus. Here we have preposition at, dative. All right, let's read. Now let's look at what we've got here. This is an interesting one. What I might do is I might skip number 3. And what we'll do is we'll go to number 4. Number 3 is fascinating, and I encourage you to look at it in your own time, particularly since it seems to preserve a curse formula that we can trace all the way back to 10th century BC hieroglyphic Luvian. But I just don't want to run out of time. It also seems to contain Phrygian word, We might come back to it if we have time, but I'd like to move on to this next one because I love this word. This is one of my favorite words, Phrygian. You'll notice it looks familiar. So why don't we read this? This is another example of a text entirely in Phrygian. Let's see how we handle the material. Any volunteers to read the Phrygian?
I can have a go.
Wonderful, please. We need more Phrygian speakers.
Iosni semun pneumeni kakun adaket aini magnes. Basioi bekos me beret at tie ke tetetik menos itu.
Wonderful, thank you. Mankes. You accidentally swapped.
Did I say magnes? Yeah, gosh, yeah, magnes.
Mankes. Aside from that, perfect. And now, of course, we have no idea what the stress patterns would have been like. We can kind of infer them in some cases, but for the most part, we don't know about accent. But we can, because of our knowledge of Koine Greek, get pretty close to understanding how this would have been pronounced. So it's quite wonderful to be able to hear Phrygian spoken again. Now, again, I mean, I never heard it before, but you know what I mean? I'm not a reincarnated Phrygian speaker or anything like that. Or maybe I am, who knows? All right, now, you're going to see here as well that the formulaic quality of this corpus is coming in. There's so many features here that we've seen before, but there's slight variation with each example, isn't there? And there was a very interesting syntactic study done of the new Phrygian corpus because there was a theory that these aren't Phrygian speakers, that these aren't native Phrygian speakers anymore, but rather what they're doing is they're sort of, they have rote learned these Phrygian phrases, right? Almost like a sacred, like a practicing Jew will have memorized certain phrases in Hebrew, or a practicing Catholic might be able to recite the Lord's Prayer in Latin or something. But these variations in the syntax actually indicate that no, this is a living vernacular. This is a living language. It's just that there is a formula to how you do a curse in this language, which is why we get this formulaic quality. It's quite beneficial for us because it allows us to fill in a lot of gaps that would otherwise be there in our knowledge. If we didn't have sort of a set formulaic structure we can map onto these inscriptions. Let's translate it. Ios ni semun knumani kakun adaket aini mankes. All right. We now know everything we need to translate the first 80% of this protasis. So I'll put it to the room. Yosni.
Whoever.
Semun knumani. Do this to him. Kakun adaket. What was that, Maria?
Does evil.
Does evil, does a wicked act. Aini. Yeah. Mankes. Yes, this is the word for stele. Now, this appears to be a genitive, mankes. This looks just like a Greek genitive, doesn't it? But actually, we would normally see the form mankai in this position. And this is the form we must read here grammatically, a dative singular. The noun is manka, and it means stele. As for why they've put a genitive instead of a dative, well, we're not actually sure this is a genitive. We haven't found other genitive forms of this noun. We're not sure how it forms its genitive. It just looks a lot like a genitive. It could be confusion with how they're pronouncing their final I. It could be that a similar phonological change has happened in Phrygian as was happening in Koine at the time, and I was often pronounced air. So they've written a letter for air there, and then they just got confused and put a sigma in. It could be that maybe the genitive and dative are starting to become confused, something that did start to happen in Greek at the same time. And indeed, modern Greek has lost its dative, much of which has been absorbed into the genitive and the accusative. We just don't know. We can guess, and that's a lot of fun, but we can't really do any more with that form, except to read it as a dative. Whoever does harm to this tomb or stele. Now we have the apodosis. Vasioi bekos me beret at tie ke titetik menos itu. Now there's some new words here, but we can see a basic formula. At tie titetik menos itu. By Zeus, let him, nominative, agreeing with the ios of the protasis, be judged. Titetik menos itu. Now, the extra words we have. Well, we have Bas. This is a deity. It's a nominative singular of the Phrygian deity Bas. This is our subject. This is one of our subjects of the apodosis. We have actually two coordinated clauses in this apodosis, two different subjects. Bas is one, and the participle referring to whoever is damaging the tomb is the other. Bas ioi, this is an anaphoric pronoun, right? So it comes from the Proto-Indo-European anaphoric pronoun, the stem of which was he, sometimes with an e that could be added in. So it would be, it could form as hei or he, which is incidentally where Latin is ea id comes from, particularly the is id sequence there. So this is a Proto-Indo-European anaphoric pronoun. This stem is preserved in Phrygian as the stem y, and then we get this ending oi, which is a masculine dative singular here. I've written for him, her, or them, but really it's for him here. For him, bas ioi, bas for him, berkos. All right, Ruben, what does berkos mean? Bread. All right. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but for me, I think this is amazing. When we see in this sort of very mythological, folkloric story of Herodotus, discussion of this Phrygian word, which is identified as meaning bread. And then we see it in an actual Phrygian inscription, a language that had died out 1,500 years ago. I think this is a wonderful synthesis of evidence that really speaks to how what we're doing here is we're looking at a real language. It's actually spoken by Phrygians and actually heard by generations and generations of Greek speakers. I think it's really fantastic. Another philologist has entered the room. For you.
Thank you. Surprise appearance.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay. Welcome, Grace. We have online Lewis, Kieran's in the room. We've got Claire. We've got Claire's possibly not actually there. We've also got Aaron, Sue, and oh, hello, Ruth. Didn't see you sneak in. And Lewis joining us from the States. It's always such a pleasure to see Lewis in the call. I can't imagine what time it is currently in where you are, Lewis. All right. Now, hello, Aaron. Now, berkos is a nominate, is a you want to be berkos is a neuter noun. We can take this as an accusative form, and it is the object, same clause that bas is the subject of. Me here is a negative particle. Proto-Indo-European me, not me, but me. It's a cognate with Greek me and Sanskrit ma, nothing tone. And it's qualifying the verb, making it negative, beret. Here we're going to see a clear cognate with Phrygian, as well as with a few other languages. This is the stem ber. The Phrygian equivalent of Greek phero, I carry, or I bear. It derives from the Proto-Indo-European root per. And from it, we also get Latin ferro, Sanskrit barati, as well as the old kind of antiquated English verb to bear as well. Notice that whereas in Phrygian, we get a b, in Greek, we get a p or a f from the same Proto-Indo-European sound. We're going to talk more about that later on when we look at the Phrygian lautavashibu.
We've already seen an example of that.
With da and tithe.
Oh, no, but with our very first Greek text where it was about the briges and the fruget.
Exactly. Thank you, Alex. Exactly right. Yes, exactly. So, and there's secondary evidence for that sequence as well. This is a subjunctive third person singular. We think it's subjunctive because of the thematic vowel that's been popped in here and because of the context. This is the apodosis of the imprecation. So we would translate this as may, and may he bring, negative, may he not bring. May bas not bring to him bread. Attieke, all right. Now, this ke is an enclitic. That that means is it likes to go after the word it qualifies. It's actually from the Proto-Indo-European. I have to go up to a previous slide to show you my note for this word. Here it is. Yeah. It's from the Proto-Indo-European clitic que. And it's cognate with Greek, with Latin que and Sanskrit cha. It's also seen in Greek te. And how this works is it links, when it's linking words together, it appears after the second word of the two words it wants to link together. So think of the Latin senatus populus que, the Senate and the people. The que goes after the populus. And when it wants to link two clauses together, it goes after the first word of the second clause that it's linking. So if we scroll down to this inscription, we can see that the art here is sort of not counting as a word for the purposes of syntax, probably because it was pretonal and it was pronounced atie by Zeus. But for the purposes of prosody, it was considered one word. And by Zeus. Atieke, and by Zeus. Itetikmenos itu, let him be judged. So this is a particularly bad apodosis. You're going to get two gods doing nasty things to you. Bas is not going to give you bread, and Zeus is going to judge you. So you really don't want to mess with this too. All right. Now, let's go to 5. Now, come on, I need someone to read some Phrygian for me. We've also got some Greek here for the group to handle. So I might get one person to do the Phrygian and someone else to do the Greek. All right, you're volunteering for the Phrygians? Yeah. Very good, very good. I can't decide which language I like more.
High praise.
I know, yeah.
Iosni Simon Knumane Kakun Abertoi Aini Astai Stamanke Tikmenos Etu.
Well done. So when we first met that word titetikmenos, we struggled with it so much, but we've said it so many times now, it's becoming quite easy, isn't it? All right.
Wait, I think I flipped my mouse. I said Tikmenos, but it's Oh, no, yeah, it is.
No, it's
I
tit.
missed the tit, yeah.
So
No, I was like,
there's the te, that's the reduplication
Yeah.
from the stem tick, but then they add the particle tit.
tit.
So it becomes titetikmenos. Yeah, wonderful. All right, and who wants to read out the Greek? You look like you're volunteering, Alex one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. You're gonna look at me like that. I'm gonna get you to read something. All right. So that is from line 5. Go ahead. Wonderful modern accent, which is actually quite close to the Koine pronunciation we would have had at the time. And the room, let's try and translate the Greek. It's a separate clause, and we can read it on its own terms. Apria, yeah, Afria, idioi andri. Oh, sorry, Afia. Whoops, I added a ruin. Afia, my bad.
The name.
Idioi andri.
Why? Oh, it's a Phrygian name.
It's so, even though it's written in Greek, we don't know where the accent would have gone because it's a Phrygian name. This is a Phrygian woman. Yeah. To her own husband. Yes, or actually, just to her husband. Point out, it's just a possessive adjective, really. To her husband.
Yes.
And what's her husband's name? Didi. Dede. Now, this is an example of lal names. And they're very common in Phrygian as well as Lydian. These are names that don't have an etymology. Like, for example, the Greek word Eutypos means Mr. White Horse Man. Or Diogenes means born of Zeus, right? And we all have names. Most of our names have etymologies. Gabriel, there's an etymology to that from Hebrew. Levi, likewise. Alexander, very, very good etymology for that one. But a lal name is a name that doesn't have an etymology. It's essentially just a sound that has an inherent aesthetic quality that leads to the name. Often these are what we call hyperchoristic names, familiar informal names. But in some languages, they become standardized names. And this was the case in Phrygian. Most Phrygian names are lal names. Most Phrygians have names like Baba, Dede, or Mem, something like that. So you can see this here. Apia quite possibly has something going on with its etymology, but Dede, this is a lal name. It's the name of her husband. Epoiesen, made, nemes karin. Okay, this phrase translates as a token of memory. It's an accusative of, it's an internal accusative. So Athia made this as a token of memory for her husband, Didi. So sweet. Now the Phrygian, Ios ni semun knumani kakun, so far so good. Whoever is to a wicked act, kakun, beretoi. Right, so here we have a different verb. So here we have that stem we saw in the previous verb, ber, and we have it with the preverb at, which is assimilated to the verb stem, causing the geminated, the double beta, ab. But again, as we've seen, this at preverb, it seems to just be movable and not really change the fundamental sense of the word. So again, we should treat this as bring to. Now here we have a middle form. All right, so we had beret in the subjunctive active in the previous one, but here we see a middle form ending in toi. This would be equivalent to the Greek middle ending thai. But it's worth noting that you also see this alternate with the form tor, with a ro at the end. You see beretoi and beretor, they essentially alternate. And it just has to, one has to note here that the Latin, perfect passive third person singular, beretur. So we get these quite clear resonances with other Indo-European languages. But the sense is the same. It's brings a wicked act to. So it's got the same sense as a dark end, really. And then we get an extra phrase, aini astai sa manke. Now the manke there, this is what we should have read in the previous text, mankai, a dative of stele. Notice that they've written I as e, representing quite a common sound change that's happening in Koine Greek. The diphthong I is becoming e. This is the dative form. Likewise, sa, it's a different textual variant of sai. All right, so sai here, this is the feminine dative of the same demonstrative pronoun we see in semun. Semun is a neuter form, neuter dative. Sai, singular, sai is the feminine dative. Now notice here that they've also not written the diphthong I. And instead of writing e, like they did with manke, they've written a. And so it seems like there's a sort of a cognitive process that's going on here where they're confused about what form they need to, what word letter they need to write to represent the phonemes that they're speaking when they're using these forms. So we should not need to translate this as sai manke, this stele, aini, or astai. Astai, let's look at the apparatus. Meaning unknown. Now this is clearly a dative adjective agreeing with the demonstrative and the noun mankai. So it's this asta stele. But as to what asta means, we don't know. It's extremely tempting to derive it from the Proto-Indo-European root stech, meaning stand, where we get histemi in Greek and store, stare in Latin. But the syntax is difficult. We don't expect the adjective to precede the pronoun. That's a little strange. So this can be some homework for you. It's one of the little mysteries that we find with Phrygian. What does astai mean? And maybe at the end of this workshop, you'll have enough tools to start doing some work to meaningfully answer those questions. All right, we have 2 Phrygian texts left and it's 11:30. We're doing pretty well. We're going to gun through them.
Before you move on, I've just got a question. Is there anything known about the deity Bas, including etymology like with Zeus?
So Bas is not the god Zeus. That is Tias. We have Zeus attested in Phrygian.
Yeah. What about the etymology?
Etymology of Bas, I can't speak to that off the top of my head. I think there's a theory that it's actually a Semitic loan.
From there.
Yeah, from Bas, exactly. There's a lot of contact between Phoenicians and Phrygians in the Iron Age, in like the 8th and 9th and 7th centuries. A lot of contact happening. And we're going to see some evidence of that when we get to the Old Phrygian period. But Bas has a long lineage within like Phrygian communities during the Roman period. They're still worshipping Bas. It seems to be a harvest deity
Yeah.
for the Phrygians, hence why they're saying Bas won't bring you bread.
Yeah, I've done a quick Google search and I'm gonna pop a link in chat, but it appears that they don't actually know where Bas is coming from.
They haven't been able to verify.
Yeah.
There are theories.
Attested god in the Phrygian corpus, but no one knows what's going on.
Yeah. Also, isn't it interesting that which god are the Phrygians the most famous for? Cybele.
Yeah.
And here in this new Phrygian corpus, we haven't met her once yet, have we? There's been
No.
Bas, there's been Zeus, there's been no Cybele. This won't be the case for the whole day. We will meet her eventually, but it's an interesting note that Cybele, although she has an extremely productive life in the Roman Empire as mother of the gods, or the great mother, this is Cybele. Within Phrygia itself, she seems to have been sort of replaced by Zeus and Bas in
We
the
just got used for cursing because it's too nice.
maybe. Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe. Actually, I like that interpretation because I'm quite fond of Cybele. All right, let's read this next one. We've got, now this is another, not a true bilingual. It's not the same text in Greek and Phrygian, but there's a Greek portion and a Phrygian portion. Why don't we get someone to read the Greek and someone to read the Phrygian, and then we'll translate. Any volunteers? By the way, online cohort, you're welcome to jump in and read out through your microphone if you want to. I know that it might not really be very easy to do so, but if anyone's frothing at the bit to read something, you're welcome to. First come, first serve. Who's going to read? Okay.
I'm kind of
Grace.
next in line.
Yes. All right. There you go. For the Greek, shall we do the
Sure. 6, right?
Yep.
Okay. Estamos sorry.
Take your time.
Those?
Deus. Yep.
Risky Gineki ke Heafto Zone Nemis Harim.
Well done. And who wants to have a go at the Phrygian? Yeah, well, go for it.
Yes, Ani, Kakon, Dakit, Gyra, K, Itis, K, Titatikmena, at Tia,
Yes, well done. Now, I think this is the one I've snuck in. We didn't meet this one last time, did we? Good. Okay, we're up to this one. Let's translate the Greek. Eudamos hypeus. Happy horse. Happy. I love it, but okay. It's unfortunately not happy horse, but that can exist in our headcanon for a while. The personal name Eudamos. And he is not a hippos, a hippeus.
Nice.
Yes, he's an equestrian. This is the Greek equivalent of the Latin term equestrian. Well, our English rendition of the Latin term. He's a knight. He's a member of the equestrian order. Pesce Vinaiki kai heauto zon nemes charin. Pesce. A name, yep. Pesce, yep. Now, this is a dative.
Yeah.
The subscript isn't written in just because it's a, I don't know why it's not written in. I think that might just be a typo. You can add a subscript to your edition. It definitely should be there because they've accented the name, which means even though she doesn't have a Phrygian name, got a Greek name. Pesce. Yeah, to the wife, Pesce. And heauto zone.
Well, just looking at the word zone in isolation, I would think like that's the participle of, this.
It is, yeah.
So it's.
Yeah. He's made it for his wife and for himself still living. Heauto zone, she is dead. He's still alive. This is a very common theme that we get. Is a spouse dies and they make the tomb inscription. They dedicate it both to the spouse who's dead and to themselves who remain. This is a formula that's particularly common in Phrygia, actually. It seems like they perhaps weren't that common on remarrying. weren't that keen on remarrying in Phrygia in the Roman period. It also seems a lot of them were losing their spouses, at least from the evidence we have, as a token of memory. So Eudamos, the knight, for his wife, Prescare, it's a tomb, so therefore she's dead, and himself still alive, sense being that when he dies, he's going to join her. It's a token of memory. Ios nisemun knumani kakun adaket zira ke oipetes ke titetikmena atie adinu. All right. You guys have 7 seconds to translate what ios nisemun knumani kakun adaket. All right, quick philological notes. Notice that we get more variation in the spelling. Epsilon iota and iota mean the same thing. Knumani here, iota instead of epsilon iota. Kakon, omicron instead of omicron, upsilon. And this is what's called hesitation between o and u. This is actually not a Koine Greek feature. This is a Phrygian feature. There are 2 common hesitations between phonemes in Phrygian. O and u often alternate, and e and I often alternate. And one way that when you're looking at the Koine Greek of the period that you can tell that this person may have been a Phrygian or a Lydian is if they swap their e and their I. For example, if they write hepo instead of hippo. Yes, anyone to this tomb, a darket, places harm, does a wicked act. That's our protasis. Here's our apodosis. Zira ke oipetes. Zira petes. Hands and feet.
Oh, we've got Patas listed as hand in the.
Slide. Everyone, petes does not mean hand, it means feet. And if you look at the note underneath, you'll see that it's clearly I'm talking about feet. Yes, apologies. The final version of this document came into being at 3 a.m. this morning. Now, this is fascinating. Here we have clear equivalence between the Phrygian word for hand and the Greek word for hands, and we can get a really clear sense of sound changes that happen in Phrygian and Greek. So, the Greek word for hand is kir, ira, plural. And this comes from the Proto-Indo-European. It's a bit hard to pronounce because it's a palatalized, voiced, aspirated alveolar stop. But this would have been pronounced something like ja. Yeah, I know. Ja. Yeah, but yeah, and yeah, I mean, we don't know how palatalized it was. Was it her or was it or something like that? But so the Proto-Indo-European word for hand was something like Jeusra.
People did speak this language.
Now, yes. Now we see this reference of the stem in Greek, Latin, and Hittite. That's for hand. So in Greek, the word for hand is kir. In Latin, it's hir. But that's one word for hand. That's like an old Latin form. The other one is manus, which is the doing thing. That's what a manus literally is. But an old word for hand is hir. And I think it comes to mean only the right hand or the left hand. It's some weird thing that happens with here. And the Hittite word for hand is geshar. Geshar. We also get Sanskrit hasta, which is from a related stem, gesto. It's kind of unique that this is an A stem noun, though. So this is basically a Phrygian first declension noun, whereas in all these other descendant languages, they're athematic or third declension nouns. So that's a bit weird. But there's evidence that the Phrygians liked the first declension and they liked sort of putting things into it, actually. Now, feet, this is even more clearly related, all right? So the stem, the Proto-Indo-European stem meaning foot is ped. And that could have ablated from ped to pod, depending on what you're doing with your feet. This is a very common thing in Proto-Indo-European that you get E and O swapping out with each other or for nothing at all. So it would have been pedes in Proto-Indo-European, which leads to podes in Greek. And we get petes, the plural, in Phrygian. Note that the voiced stop, the D in Indo-European, is still a D in Greek, but they unvoice it in Phrygian. It becomes a T. Very interesting. This is something that must have happened in the very early days when Phrygians and Greeks had only just separated from the Proto-Indo-European speaking population and moved into the Balkans. All right. Oi.
sorry. Is that, okay, is that just for the dentals?
We'll see. I've got a page.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a page that's going to blow your mind. Maybe you're going to love it. Great. All right. So now oi here, this is once again the anaphoric pronoun to him, and this is a dative of possession. And once again, we have the care here in the post-positive position because it's an enclitic. So the new clause, we get two clauses in the apodosis divided by care, and the new clause starts here before the zira. So ios ni semon kunumani kakun adaket. Sorry, that's the protarsis. No, that's the apodosis. No, that's the protarsis of the curse. Sorry, everyone. Anyone who does harm to this tomb. Oh, yes. So the care here, sorry, it's not coordinating a clause. It's coordinating the hands and the feet because we get the repetition of the care, which means it has the sense of both and. Both hands to him, both his hands and his feet, may they be cursed, may they be judged by Zeus. And this context gives us a sense that judge here might not just mean judge, but it might be judge with a negative connotation, divinely judge, as in curse. May they be cursed by Zeus. Now, this is a very common formula we also get in Greek curses from the area. It seems to be a cultural thing in this part of Anatolia that they curse people in their hands and their feet. There's one that we skipped, but an earlier example, which I skipped over, we saw an old 10th century Luvian curse still being used in the 3rd century AD in Phrygia. So it seems like these curses are very deeply culturally rooted in this area. Now, here's one last one for us to read. And this is just to prove to you guys that they're not all curses. We have some stuff in New Phrygian that isn't a curse. All right. Any volunteers? So once again, we have a Greek portion and a Phrygian portion. Now, you'll notice that this is like, this is very strangely laid out because this is what we call a door frame inscription. So this would have originally been written along the top and then down the side of the frame of a door. It wasn't actually a door, it was just a niche carved in a rock in the shape of a door. Quite a few Phrygian tombs take this shape because the idea is that they are the doorway to the afterlife. It's quite charming. And so that's why this is written in this sort of very, very convenient method for us to read. Could the hand and foot curse reference slavery? It could, but I think it more references common diseases of the hands and feet. Things like gangrene or even just injuries while working. The reason why I say that is because I've looked quite a bit into Asclepiae. These are the Greek temples of Asclepius. It seems to be in the ancient world one of the most common sorts of afflictions that you get, because we have a lot of inscribed material from Greek Asclepiae where they basically thank the god for having these things healed. And one of the most common types of problems that you get is worms in people's feet, gangrene in their toes, and just accidents in which their hands are broken or cut off. If you think about ancient Mediterranean life, this isn't really surprising, particularly if you're living in a more rural context. These are the things that are going to be one of the most common afflictions that you're going to meet. So I take that I take this as a reference to that, and particularly since we do actually get other curse formulae preserved in the Phrygian corpus talking about slavery, in which they're basically saying, may their freedom be taken away from you. So it seems like when they want to curse you with slavery, they're doing it quite literally in Phrygian. Let's read the Greek. Are there any volunteers in the room or online to read?
Whatever.
Maybe he has auto-nominated himself.
Apollonia Andri kai Huio Nemes Karin Diogenia Patri ke Adelpho Nemes Karin.
So we have two dedications. Apollonia to her husband and child, Andri kai Huio, son, I should say, as a token of memory, Nemes Karin. And then Diogenea to Patri, to her father, and Adelpho, brother, Nemes Karin. The Patri and the Andri are the one person, no doubt. and the huio and the adelpho are the same. So Apollonia is no doubt the mother of Diogenia. And the mother and daughter have one, their husband and son, presumably at around about the same time. We can assume that there was some sort of accident or something that would cause this, or perhaps they both got the same sickness. They gave it to each other. Quite bad, really. All right, let's read the Phrygian. Any volunteers?
Okay.
Thank you, Alex.
Monan mbrotia ion egesit egrimenon.
Well done. So you managed to read like 8 lines of Phrygian in 1 second. It's just one word spread over so many lines. Wonderful. Gegrimenon. All right. Monan mbrotia ion egesit gegrimenon. All right. Now notice we have quite a different sequence here. All right. Let's look at the words we recognize. Ion. That's quite friendly. Ion. This is the masculine of ios. So who. Now, the antecedent for this relative pronoun is monan mrotie. All right. Now, so what we have here is discord of cases, and I'll explain that in a minute why. Monan is an adjective, and it's actually in the dative singular here. Okay, it must be dative. What we would normally expect is mornai. Now, do you remember that earlier case where we had sa for sai? This is quite possibly hypercorrection. What that means is they would have pronounced it morna, and they've stopped pronouncing their final nasals. Another thing you can see, both in the Koine Greek spoken in this area, we recently met that in the Weird Greek. Remember, they wrote angelon instead of angelo. By the way, for those who aren't aware, I'm just referencing a Greek reading group that I run that some people in the room will attend. So you encounter this feature in the Greek, the spoken Greek of Anatolia of the 3rd and 2nd century CE. They're not pronouncing their final nasals. So when they wanted to say the accusative, monan, they would have said mona. Now then, often because they have this confusion with how to spell the dative, mona or morne, however it was pronounced, originally it was mornai, what they've done is they've known that mona is the incorrect spelling of the dative form. So they've tried to correct it to what they think is the correct spelling, and they've put the wrong case ending in. This is what we call hypercorrection. It's very common in documentary evidence. So we need to read this as mornai. Now, mrotie, this is also a dative singular. This is a dative singular, and it means corpse. This is clearly deriving from the Proto-Indo-European stem mrti, and we see this stem in words like Latin mors, mortis, which can mean death, but also a corpse when used metonymically. All right, and that's the sense here, corpse. So we have for dative, for a corpse, monan, alone, or only for a corpse. So this is either a loan word from Greek monos or a cognate. We actually are unsure of the etymology of Greek monos. Yeah, surprising, but we're not sure where it comes from. So for a corpse alone, now the antecedent of this is the corpse. Even though the corpse is feminine, this must be referring back to a corpse. So either this is an example where the gender is fluid when it comes to collective nouns. So the idea is that corpse is sort of a collective singular, corpses, or simply an error. So for a corpse alone, monan, whom, ion, egesit, gegrimenon. These are our 2 final words here. Egesit, this is a 3rd person singular indicative, present active of the stem eges. Here we seem to have the Phrygian reflex of Proto-Indo-European stem seg, which is in Indo-European would have had the sense holder over power. From it, we get Greek epo, the having verb. You also get Sanskrit sahate, means to overwhelm. Now, it's weird to have this S in the stem. It should be something like exit or egit, something like that. It could just be some sort of suffix that they've added back in Phrygian. So this is, I wrote whom before, but it really should be which holds gegrimenon. This is a perfect passive participle, masculine singular of the verbal root gre, meaning to write or paint. So it's tempting to connect this with grapho, but this actually comes from Proto-Indo-European krei, strike. And from that we get the Greek verb krio, which means graze or smear, which I think we concluded is the root of the stem Christos, right, in Christ. There you go. As an anointed one, smeared one, having oil smeared.
And grime in English.
Right, and grind as well.
Grime.
Oh, grime.
Like grimy.
Grime, okay. That makes more sense. So he's the grimy one.
Theologically.
Actually, yeah. Depending on your theology. So now here it means to write or paint. This is clearly a verb of writing or painting. And what we have here is a periphrastic form. So which the sense of egesit gegrimenon is has been written. So this is a very common sequence of a finite verb and a perfect participle forming a perfect passive. It's the same way that Latin forms its perfect passives. That's fascinating. So the sense here of the Phrygian is for a corpse alone, which has been written, as in specifically for the husband and son of Apollonia. So what they're saying written down the door here is don't put anyone else in this tomb, literally written along the side of the door frame to the tomb. Although there's no actual tomb in there, it's just like a little niche where you can deposit the bones of the deceased. Okay, everyone. Now that's, okay, cool. We've got an hour to go before we break again. Is that right? One for the next break? 1 to 2, and then yes, very good. So this is good. We're getting into the old Phrygian portion now, which is really, really what I've been working on over the last few weeks to prepare for you. And so we're turning to the central page of our document. Now, any questions about this New Phrygian or comments on the New Phrygian stuff that we've met? What do we think about it?
But I like it.
I mean, what we can see is a language. Yeah, I mean, I find it to be quite cute. What we can see quite clearly is a language that shares a lot of morphological features with Greek, doesn't it? Now, it can be difficult to tell how much of this actually comes from contact with Greek and how much of this is inherited from their shared ancestry in Proto-Indo-European, their shared very close ancestry. Remember, they're both on the same clade of the Indo-European family tree. Okay. However, we can work with the material quite well because it's enmeshed in this Greek context and it's very formulaic. Remember that this is coming from very late. All of these New Phrygian inscriptions, most of them come from the 2nd, 3rd century CE, a period where most other languages, we think, like non-Greek Roman languages, non-Greek languages had died out in Anatolia. Most Anatolian languages definitely had, with one exception. All Anatolian languages seem to have died out by then. As well as things like the Celtic dialect of Galatian and whatnot. All these seem to be long gone in the Roman period. But these Phrygians are still using this language in these sort of small rural communities, and they're using it to write down, you know, these curses and these things on their funerary monuments. But by then it's been in contact with Greek. It's literally been spoken in a largely bilingual environment for centuries. So as we go to the old Phrygian stage of the language, we're going back in time over half a millennium, right? Where some of these documents are from the 7th, 8th century BC, okay? And then the youngest of them is from like the 4th. So we're looking at an earlier stage of the language in which it hasn't had this enmeshed relationship with Greek for as long or at all. And so we're going to rely more on the shared features with Greek that are inherited from Indo-European in order for us to make sense of the Old Phrygian that we see written down. Now, one of the most important tools for us to be able to do that is something we've already sort of dabbled in, which is what's called often in Phrygian scholarship, and this is a technical philological term, a Lautverschiebung. So laut is German for sound. It's where we get loud from. And so Lautverschiebung is essentially sound change. And sound change laws are essentially a central way that we establish the taxonomical relationship between related languages. There's various ways that languages change, okay? They can change by having loan words incorporated into their vocabulary. They can use logic and analogy to structure to restructure their grammar, okay? Like how in English, for example, we're dropping whom because we don't really know what to do with it. And sometimes we use it as a subject, sometimes an accusative, all right? This is a cognitive change that's happening structurally in English. But we also undergo sound changes. All languages undergo sound changes. It's like an inescapable natural force. Articulation of phonemes will shift and sounds will change in language. We all talk about it day to day, how the next generation pronounces things a little bit different to our generation, usually with disgust and disdain. Well, the accretion of this over generations and generations, over centuries, actually leads to mutual intelligibility. It leads to bifurcations along with logical, grammatical, structural changes on the family trees of languages. It's how languages split. Now, what we can do by doing, what we can discover by doing comparative philology is patterns of sound changes. We can make laws for them. And that's how we, what we call a Lautverschiebung, sound change law. Aaron has a question. Could Greeks likely understand Phrygian like some speakers of Germanic languages, Dutch and Danish, can often understand a lot of each other's languages? Very good question, and I think about that a lot. And that's why we started off by reading some of that Greek testimonia about Phrygian, where we sort of tried to get a sense for what the Greeks thought about Phrygians. I think the best example for that from the Greek testimonia is that quote of Socrates in that Platonic dialogue. It seems to me that the assumption amongst Greeks is that Phrygian is a barbaric tongue and therefore not Greek. And it's the more educated Greeks who tend to stop and think about things, and there's no one who does that more than Socrates, who observe that, well, actually there are similarities in these languages. I think therefore that Phrygian and Greek were not mutually intelligible, but had quite readily apparent similarities if you chose to stop and look at it. Because of that, I think Phrygian and Greek, even though they're sister languages. So because of that, I think Phrygian and Greek probably would equate to something like a modern English. Perhaps a good example is a modern English and a modern Dutch speaker. I'm an English speaker, Levi, you're a Dutch speaker. If you start speaking in Dutch, I'm not going to understand it. Every now and then, there'll be a Dutch phrase that just sounds so much like English and will have the same meaning. I think it would be a similar relationship with English and with Phrygian and Greek. I think the relationship between, say, Danish and something like Norwegian is much closer. I mean, Danish and Norwegian are essentially dialects of the same language. And I think that's closer than the relationship we'd have between Greek and Phrygian. Now let's look at this Lautverschiebung. Basically, what the New Phrygian corpus allows us to do is look at these sound change laws and to build a system, a regular system of what Indo-European phonemes turn into what in Phrygian. Now, at this point, I need to stop for a second and explain something about Proto-Indo-European phonology, all right? Proto-Indo-European had a strange phonology, at least it's strange for us. By that, I mean, there were sounds in Proto-European that were phonemic. That means that they, when applied to a word, could change its meaning rather than being allophonic, where they wouldn't. So an example of phonemic sounds in English is, say, the difference between bread and dread. Now, that might seem obvious to us as English speakers, but what those two different words teach us about English is b, a voiced bilabial stop, and d, a voiced dental stop, are phonemic. They carry meaning and will change the meaning of the word if you swap them out for each other. An example of an allophonic, show me an example of allophones in English. How about the difference between, I had one prepared earlier and I forgot that. Okay, a good example of an allophonic change in.
Who versus who?
Okay, good example. Some people will pronounce the initial consonant in the relative pronoun who, yeah, essentially as an affricate, who or who. Some will pronounce it who, and some will pronounce it. It's so hard with who, but it's that way. That who, like people who say instead of when, who say when. Now this is allophonic. There's no difference between when and when, or who and who. But in other languages, there could be, all right? So these are allophones and phones, all right? Now what you have here on this chart is essentially a list of all of the Proto-Indo-European phonemes. So these are the sounds in Proto-Indo-European that when you swap them out for each other, they could change the meaning of a word. This is how, and we've constructed this by doing the comparative study of related words in different descended languages and triangulating back to see what possible single ancestor of all of these different sounds could have been. That's why we get some strange sequences of sounds. So you basically have in Proto-Indo-European, you have these, how many of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories of sounds. You've got stops, which are voice, stops, which are unvoiced. You've got your sonorants, which are semivowels, your sonorants, which are liquids, your sonorants, which are sibilants, your sonorants, which are pure vowels, and your sonorants, which are, oh, the scary one, laryngals. Now, basically, a stop is a consonant that cannot be continuously articulated. In order to pronounce it, you need to stop the passage of air through your mouth, essentially. For example, d, all right? We articulate a d by trapping the air in our mouth and then releasing it when we voice the d, all right? So these are stops. Stops cannot be continuously pronounced. You can't just constantly pronounce that d because they involve trapping and then releasing air, why we call them stops. Sonorants are the other type of consonant, or rather the other type of phone, where they can be continuously pronounced. So these are obviously vowels like air or, but they are also what we call resonants or consonants that can also be continuously pronounced, such as the semivowels like y or y, but also the alveolar trill, the nasal approximant l, which is our L in English, w, the bilabial approximant, and a good old-fashioned nasals m and n. Now notice that in Proto-Indo-European, sometimes these can act as vowels. That means sometimes they can form the internal component of a syllable. So for example, the Proto-Indo-European word for 100 is kungtong, which is a K, a M, and a T, and then another M. So that first M in kungtong is actually acting like a vowel, which is why we call them semivowels. All right. But then you also have words in Proto-Indo-European where M is just a consonant like it would be in English. So you've got your stops, which basically are like English B, D, G, etc. You've got your semivowels or your sonorants, which sometimes are like in English. For example, how E and Y are both vowels and semivowels, but also aren't a lot like English. For example, in English, m is always a vowel, but in Proto-Indo-European is always a consonant. But in Proto-Indo-European, it can also work like a vowel. Something that's easy in Proto-Indo-European is it has one sibilant, just like in English, most dialects of English. So that's a relief. And then finally, we have this scary category over here, the laryngals. Now, basically, these are a sequence of sonorants, so phonemes that could be vowels or consonants. And these were some of the last phonemes to be reproduced in Indo-European because for the most part, in descendant Indo-European languages, these are gone entirely. And we can only see that they were there by looking at the effect they had on syllables adjacent to them before they dropped off. And we call this vowel coloring. So there's quite a few vowels in descendant Indo-European languages that changed how they were pronounced. They could go to an A or an I or an E, depending on what laryngeal went before them.
Is it true that there's some kind of trace of them in Hittite?
Hittite preserves 2 of them, one as an H and one as a glottal stop. Yeah, but Hittite was only deciphered 70 years ago. So for much of the history of Indo-European studies, this was purely theoretical. And it was a theory that was then proved true when Grozny first deciphered Hittite in 1947.
That's one of the reasons that, look, despite the, we don't know exactly how they were pronounced, despite, all of the difficulties, how unnatural it sounds to like most modern language speakers, because there's not many languages that reflect like a laryngeal pattern like this. The fact that they were theorized, predicted, and then at least 2 of them showed up in Hittite, it's like, this works.
Your system does work, and it
It's
is
just great.
representative of a real language that was spoken at some time. And it explains things that we see in descendant languages. Now, the term laryngeal is a bit of a misnomer. This has its origin in Ferdinand de Saussure, who was an 18th, 19th century linguist and essentially the founder of modern linguistics, who also came up with this theory. And he thought that they were laryngeals, which are there's a type of consonant that would have been pronounced kind of halfway through the vocal tract. He was wrong. Turns out that the laryngeals aren't laryngeal, they're actually just aspirants. They're H sounds. But this name has stuck. We still call them laryngeals. But these are basically just the Indo-European H sounds.
There's some conventional way among scholars to pronounce these.
Okay. This is a very controversial thing. Quite a few philologists insist that there's no way to reconstruct these. But someone who I work with in my research, philological obsession, whatever you want to call my dabbling in Hittite and Phrygian and stuff like that, is actually a scholar of Indo-European prosody. So his specialization is trying to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European accent patterns, primarily using Anatolian languages and Sanskrit as evidence. He's based at UCLA. He insists that Indo-Europeanists who really focus on articulation and prosody have essentially agreed on the value of H1, laryngeal 1, and H2, laryngeal 2. H3 is still not sure. Well, H1 was essentially probably quite similar to the English aspirant H. H2 was probably an affricated version of the same. So H3 may have been a voiced affricated version, but that's not sure. So it may have been something like ah. Yeah. But H1 and H2 are essentially, according to him, pretty reliably concluded to be Now, one thing to discuss before we move on. Basically, what I've just described is the sounds that exist in Proto-Indo-European that make words, all right? Now, these are mostly phonemes, but some are allophones. So for example, often you'll find that E as a consonant and E as a vowel are just allophones. They're not actually changing the meaning of the word. But we have to deal with them because E will sometimes be a consonant, E will sometimes be a vowel, depending on the sequence of syllables that make up the word. Within the paradigm, for example, as you decline a noun in Indo-European, sometimes you'll see E go from a vowel to a consonant, or U. An example of that is when we met Zeus earlier. If I quickly go back to my note on Zeus. Here it is. If you read this note on Zeus, notice that the nominative single stem is Jeu. Now, that Y there, that's actually an I. It's just acting as a consonant because it's on the periphery of a syllable, right? So that's why we write it as a Y and not an I. But then what happens is that E that's in the syllable, that's the nucleus of the syllable. Well, Proto-Indo-European does this thing where it gets rid of the E when it goes out of the nominative. So the stem goes from Jeu to Diu. So you see how the consonantal reflex of I, the Y, has just become an E, a vowel, because now it's in the nucleus of the syllable. So this is what we mean when we say allophones. This is actually the same phoneme, E and Y, allophonic. But one sequence of phonemes in Indo-European that are always phonemic, that are never allophonic, are the stops. And these are the ones that I want us to get good at today. These are what I want us to kind of practice a bit. So that's this part chart here. Oh, by the way, there's a little man with a Phrygian hat for your benefit, because I didn't know what to put in that little void there. But just to keep things light. So this is the sequence of stops we have in Indo-European. And then what we've been able to do, that's the purpose of this chart, is we've been able to partially create a Phrygian Lautverschiebung using the new Phrygian evidence. So this isn't complete. If you try to make a chart like this, for example, for Greek, it's 3 times as big. There's all of these sub-rules and sub-rules and sub-rules, and we can really meticulously like create a very granular, highly detailed Lautverschiebung. But this is sort of like a generic one that we can do for Greek. So these are the Proto-Indo-European stops. We have a sequence of bilabials. These are the B or P sounds. So we have a voiced one, B. Then if you go over here, we have an unvoiced one, P, which is actually voiced, but yeah, which is actually aspirated. So we have B and P. Then we have a funny version of that. We have the breathy voiced version. Yeah. And this is, for example, what has led to the retroflex consonants in Indic languages. So then we have a sequence of dentals, and we have the same triple sequence. We have the voiced D, we have the unvoiced T, and then we have the breathy voiced G. Then with our palatals, we have the same sequence. We have the unvoiced K, we have the voiced G, and then we have the breathy voice down here, G. But then with our palatals, we have 2 extra variants. All right, we have a palatalized palatal, which is basically means that when you're pronouncing your K sound, you bunch up the tongue halfway up your alveolar ridge. So it goes from G voice to J. Yeah. We have an unvoiced version too, which goes from K to Ch. We then also have what's called the labiovelar versions, which is when essentially when you're making your K sound, you take your lips and you round them as if you're also making a W at the same time. So you have H, and you also have Qu, very similar to how we pronounce the Q in Queen, but with more lip rounding in English. And then you have a voiced version. So you have G, but you also have Gu with lip rounding. And then just to make things really crazy, you also have a breathy voiced version of the lip rounded one. So you have
How aggressive.
no. Now, these are the sequences that we can most reliably apply a sound change for in Phrygian. B in Phrygian becomes P. B becomes B. It devoices. D devoices to become T. But when it's at the end of the word, it becomes a bilabial W. Quite a strange thing that Phrygian does. It doesn't always do this. It sometimes does this. D deaspirates and becomes D. G devoices and becomes K. G loses the breathy quality and becomes G. The palatal J becomes K. And
Both depalatalized and devoices.
yes. Now the breathy voiced palatal J, we don't know how it was pronounced in Phrygian, but this is the same phoneme that becomes zeta in Greek. So it's written with a zeta in New Phrygian, and they have a separate letter for it in Old Phrygian, which we're going to meet. So this either was something like a z, like it is in Greek, or a st, but it also could have been something like a j or a j. I'm not sure. Gu and gu basically just lose their rounding and become k or g. And you can read the rest of the sequence there. Now, the reason why I want this to get in your head is because in Greek, these outcomes are different. For example, the most notable one, the breathy voiced stop, b, what do you think that becomes in Greek? By. So in Phrygian, when you get a b, in Greek, you'll get a p.
That's what we were seeing with the
Yes. Likewise, exactly, yeah. Likewise, d, what do you think that becomes in Greek?
Beta.
Beta, t, but in Phrygian, d. Lastly, the breathy voiced p, that becomes chi Greek. In Phrygian, good. All right, we have a question. Are there any insights as to why such sound changes occur in the way they did for Phrygian and Greek? Yeah, and the study of that is a division of linguistics called diachronic phonology, phonotactics, and I've tried to read some books on that, and it's so technical that I can't make much headroom. But there's basically these theories of it's processes that are called fortition and lenition, which essentially means strengthening and weakening of articulation. Basically, it's all about the acoustic energy that happens in each individual phoneme and whether you're adding more acoustic energy or less to that and how you articulate it. That will create these changes in sound. Now, as to why, or as to trying to come up with reliable taxonomies of how fortition and lenition occurs, that's a whole sort of like level of linguistics that's sort of dark matter that I'm not proficient enough to teach to you guys. But there are, if you want to study that phenomenon, I recommend studying phonotactics and diachronic phonology, which there are many linguistics textbooks that will serve as introductions to these fields. Now, very quickly, notice in Phrygian it devoices to per. In Greek, what do you think it is? Beta. Likewise, delta, becomes delta in Greek, but is t. Phrygian and g becomes gamma in Greek, but is kappa in Phrygian. So with these stops, I want you to kind of keep in mind this laut Verschiebung as we read some Old Phrygian. And it's kind of going to be our guiding light as we go into this phase of the language, because as we'll see, we have less enmeshed Greek material to use as a reference. All right, now, so part 3 and our final part, direct testimonia to Phrygian number 2, inscriptions and graffiti in Old Phrygian. Right, so more Old Phrygian has been uncovered than that of New Phrygian. Finds have been found across a vast swathe of central and eastern Anatolia and in greater quantities. However, this stage of the language presents numerous difficulties in decipherment that are only slightly ameliorated by its greater corpus. The archaic alphabet in which it is written, though clearly a close relative of Greek, occasionally presents letter forms with values which are not entirely clear. Here's the alphabet. We're going to return to this as we read some of the Old Phrygian texts, because I have deigned not to transcribe some of them. We shall do that ourselves. The main things with the letter forms to remember are these 3 weird letters here. And look at that delta. There's no bottom to the delta. Tends to look like a lambda. Look at their lambda. That's what we call a West Greek or a red Greek lambda, where essentially the right bar is just a little dash. You'll also notice that the mu and the nu exhibit a similar phenomenon where the right stars aren't fully formed. Pi likewise. Also note that the iota, or what we call yod, actually, we have two iotas essentially. We have an iota, which is just a vertical dash, but then we also have a separate form for the yod, which looks, oh, it's not on this chart.
Top middle.
Top middle. Oh, it's right there in front of me. Thank you. So it looks essentially like a zigzag pattern.
Phoenician.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because this really comes from Phoenician or from the same alphabet that Phoenician comes from. There's various theories about that. If you're very interested in the evolution of the alphabet, that's another subfield that you'll find yourself reading a lot about Phrygian. And we'll explain more of that later. But notice that essentially what this is an example of what I was talking about with allophones. So the reason why Greek just has the one letter for I and Y is because the Greeks recognize that they're allophonic in their language. They're different pronunciations of the same phoneme. Sometimes it's an I, sometimes it's a Y, depending on where it is in the word. But in Phoenician, they're phonemes. There's a difference between Y and I. That's why they have different letters. In Phrygian, they've preserved the Phoenician habit. And so when it's a semivowel, a Y, you use this yod letter. Now, the primary source of difficulty, though, isn't this alphabet. It's actually not that bad. It's that there's a lack, for the most part, of contextual linguistic material with which to understand the Phrygian language, like the Greek is for New Phrygian. Without clear formulas to compare our Old Phrygian texts against, we place a greater emphasis on the use of etymology and inference in order to produce tentative translation. Let's start looking at some Old Phrygian. Number 1, Midas city or Yazilikaya. which thanks to Wyatt, a member of our group, I now know means inscribed rock in Turkish, which is literally what it is. It's an inscribed rock. It's also known as Midas Kale, Midas Fortress. It's one of the important sites for the study of old Phrygian inscriptions. It's commonly referred to as Midas City, and it's a mountain fortress. It seems to be a mountain fortress featuring a concentration of cultic monuments dedicated to the mother goddess, most of which date to the Middle Phrygian period. So that's the 8th to the 6th century BC. So we've gone way back in time. 16 inscriptions have been discovered and sized into cut rock monuments likely associated with ritual activity. The most common type are facades, which you can see a drawing of here. Typical of Western Phrygia, we see these sorts of monuments all over Western Phrygia, including some unfinished examples, such as the Little Yazilikaya, or unfinished monument. So around the corner from the Midas monument at Yazilikaya, there's another one that's half the size, and literally it's basically this first half of the relief. And then after that, beneath it, it's just rock. So literally what they seem to do is they start at the top, and with complete detail and complete layering, they did the entire, they cut out the entire relief. And like a bitmap downloading in the old days of the internet, they just went bit down until they got to the bottom. Now this is enormous, guys. This is like 35, 40 feet tall. A human being is about that big. Now there's various inscriptions on this monument. We're going to read two, one up here and one down here along the side. There it is. This was the first ever Phrygian inscription that was identified as Phrygian in the 18th century by German tourists in Turkey. How did they identify that it was Phrygian, do you think? Text, middle here, you die. Such a famous Phrygian character, right? And so they looked at that and they thought, this was Phrygian. This is the sort of thing that a lot of 18th and 19th century like tourists in Anatolia and the Near East did and got wrong. But in this case, they were actually right. It is actually Phrygian. Now, guys, over to the team. You're going to need to transcribe this. That's why I've left a little gap underneath. You're going to need to write down what we're seeing here. Now, so you're going to have to refer to your alphabet chart. Now, what's something that you notice, and those of us who've recently done the Phrygian reading group, Louise Pryke's wonderful Phrygian reading group, which I encourage everyone to go to. She's doing it again. Sorry, not Phrygian, Phoenician reading group. Will recognize
Word space.
word space. Now, I don't like ragging on Greek, but
Change.
the Phoenician had word spaces. For the most part, Greek doesn't, which means that if the traditional account that Greek comes from Phoenician is true, it means that the first Greek speakers looked at that innovation of a word boundary, a word space divider, and thought, we don't need that. And I'm sorry, but we do. We really do. Thank goodness the Phrygians weren't so silly and they kept it for the most part. So we have word boundaries. It's worth noting that word boundaries don't always work the way spaces do. When you have things like enclitics or coordinating conjunctions, often they'll be nestled within the same word boundary. But don't worry, there's nothing scary like that here. Can anyone identify the first word? Now, also a little bit of the apparatus is there to help you, but what is it? Let's spell out our first word. Yeah, I know. Well, how about I mean, it's on your page, but there we go. Yeah, it's hard. So what's our first word? Alex 1, what's our first letter? Is this mine?
Yeah. I got it for you.
It's an alpha. Do you feel comfortable to keep going?
The T.
It is a T, which is a tau in Greek. In Phoenician, it's, what's the word? A tav?
Tav, that's right.
Thank you. Tav or tav? No. Sorry.
The tetal.
Yeah, tetal tav. And then in Phrygian, we don't know what they call their letters. Do you want to keep going?
It's an E.
It is an E. What's the Greek word for E?
It would be epsilon.
Greek word for E blow your mind, is here. And then when the letter for H, heta, came to have the value of H, of E, of a long E, they changed the word for E from here to epsilon, specifying. At this archaic stage of Greek, the letter for E would just be here. But yes, anyway, this is a letter E, correct?
So that is an S.
Yes, sigma, that's very good. So how would you pronounce this?
Tess.
Ates. This is a personal name, nominative masculine singular. Ates, ates, ates. It's the subject of this inscription. We see this name pop up in a few other places, ates.
In this Catullus poem about a devotee of Cybele named Attis.
Well, Attis was Cybele's consort, it's not a god. But then, I mean, that is Attis is a very old Lal name. One of these Lal names. There's been attempts to connect it to to an etymology meaning Mr. Father from one of the Indo-European. And in, like, for example, in Hittite, the word but it's inconclusive. It's because the name seems to be older than even Hittite. There are people called variants of Artes that are like Hattic speakers, which are the indigenous population to Anatolia before the Hittites moved in. We have some of their language that survives too. So it seems to be an ancient Lal name in the area. And it seems like the god Attis may be named after this ancient name. Attis is a much younger god that kind of gets incorporated into the pantheon and ends up becoming the consort of Cybele. And then from that, you have a derivation of, it kind of comes back and it becomes a theonym. So that Attis from the Catullus poem is a theonym of a deonym, of a Lal name that's extremely ancient. Yeah. This is some Phrygian guy called Attis. And we know a bit more about him. Does anyone want to suggest a reading for the next word? Yes. Archiaeweis. Well done. Now you'll notice there we have a Phrygian letter W, a digamma, which is one that isn't antiquated. It is in archaic Greek alphabets. So this is a patronymic. So this is an adjective that's in the nominative masculine singular. And this seems to be how Phrygians form their patronymics. Do we all know what a patronymic is? Anyone online doesn't know, pop a comment in.
Say it anyway.
Now, so in Greek, we generally do that. Not always, like there's quite a few Homeric patronymics that are adjectives actually. But the conventional way is to use a genitive of the father. But this Phrygian formation is more like a Homeric patronymic in the sense that it's an adjective meaning son of. Here, son of Archias. So the element ewais probably comes from the Proto-Indo-European possessive infix went, which would have gone in the 0 grade to a nasalized wunt with a nominative singular ending. And that would have in a Proto-Phrygian form become wants. And then that wants, the nasal dental sigma sequence would have simplified to ice, to a diphthong, weiss. So this is an old Proto-Indo-European possessive adjective, which now in Phrygian has a patronymic sense. The name is interesting though, because Archias is a Greek name. So even in this very early period, we seem to have Greek names making their way into the Phrygian language. So we have Ates, the son of Archias, Ates Archiaeweis. Does anyone want to try and cut out another word?
Akenanogawos.
Perfect. Akenanogawos. Ates Archiaeweis Akenanogawos. Wonderful word, isn't it? Akenanogawos. Now, this is another nominative singular dramatic noun. So we see that os ending, which is so recognizable in Greek. Now, the it's referring to Artes Archiewais, Artes, the son of Archias. It's a nominative singular in apposition, that. And it's describing a title that he had. It's not another patronymic. Some people have tried to identify Akenanogawos as like a genitive patronymic, like based on that os ending, and have suggested that it's Artes, son of Archias, and the grandson of Akenan, or something like that. But no, this fairly reliably seems to mean Akenanogawa. The reason why is because that ogao element, Akenan ogaos. So we're not sure what an Akenan is, but that ogaos is actually an exact cognate with the Greek noun okeus. Okeus, from seg, to hold in Indo-European. All of this information is in my note actually for this entry here. Here. Now, there's various priestly titles in the earlier stages of Greek religion, like literally in Linear B. We have some of these terms come up, like for example, the kledoporos, which is the holder of the key, or the key bearer. And this was a title of one of the most important priestesses in Athens. It was actually reserved for priestesses. They were the only ones who got to keep the key. I'm not sure what the key is of, presumably the temple or in a shrine or something. But anyway, it was like a massive key, right? Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that an Akenan is a key, but we can see based on the Lautverschiebung and based on the shared social history of religious practices in Greece from the Bronze Age and the early Iron Age and the neighboring Phrygian culture. It seems like this is the most likely interpretation. And so this is a mix of what I'm talking about, where we take an internal linguistic interpretation and we connect it to something extra linguistic. So we know that there are key bearers that are priestly titles, but we can use linguistics. We can look at an analysis of the features of this word orgao and connect it to okeos. And we can combine these two together, and that is when we can actually offer tentative interpretations of Phrygian. We have these two elements: rigorous internal linguistic analysis, studying the Lautverschiebung, things like that, but then we also need to connect it extra-linguistically. And this is particularly important in Old Phrygian. We don't have Greek inscriptions surrounding the area that can inform us what's going on. So I would translate this, and certain other scholars have as well, as the holder of the Akenan. It's a priestly title. Anyone want to have a go at another word? Yes, midai. Now, what is the noun? It's midas. But what case is this? Yes, this is clearly a dative of a stem, midai. This is interesting because midas in Greek is an a stem, but it's a masculine a stem. One of those masculine first declensions, mida, midu. So midas, midu. This seems to be a straight up first declension dative. What I'm saying is that the Phrygians seem to have taken, or rather the Greeks seem to have taken a Phrygian first declension noun and made it into a masculine first declension noun.
That's
It's probably analyzing the gender of this. Yeah. So this is 2 midas or 4 midas. Now, we know from history, from mythology, that Midas was king of Phrygia. Well, let's keep reading. Well, Grace has jumped in. What have you got? Yeah, you skipped ahead. You skipped a word.
I've got go.
No, that would be a gamma in a classical alphabet.
Lambda.
Lambda. Lawa. Lawagtai. This is a dative singular noun, and it means leader of the people.
Oh, lao.
Has anyone studied the Linear B tablets? Alex is like,
Gold.
Rawageta.
Lawagetas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rawageta. So this is one of the words that allowed us to decipher linear B as Greek. There's this clear sequence, Rawageta, which was a title in Mycenaean society. And that clearly maps onto a Doric word, lagetas. Got it in my apparatus there for you. Lagetas. Here it is, lagetas. And so it's a term used in the linear B tablets in Mycenae to refer to a title of aristocrats or like high-ranking officials within their society. Here we get it referred to Midas, because it's in the dative, lawagtae. Now notice here in Phrygian, it's an athematic form, lawagtas. It's in a different declension, but it's clearly the same word. And then he's not just the lawagtae. What other word have we got? Wanatae. Now this is a good, you'll like this, Alex 1. Oh, sorry, Alex A. Alex to my right. This is a good Homeric word. What is it? Fill it in.
Anax, which has a diagram at the beginning, so it's really wanax. So wanakti. So yeah, I don't know.
Isn't this pre-Greek?
Sorry?
It's pre-Greek.
I don't know where it comes from, but it says, you know, chronioni anakti.
Yes.
Just that.
Yes.
Adjective.
So that's Zeus Chroneos, king.
Oh yeah, it's like child of Kronos. Yeah.
Yes, Zeus, the child of Kronos, king. Yeah. Now, so this is a very ancient word in Greek. The general understanding is that in the Mycenaean period, wanax refers to a king, these kings of the Mycenaean palaces. This is another term that occurs in Linear B. In Homer, it's also the kings that you see, for example, Odysseus is a wanax, right? Now, these are fairly petty kings as well, it has to be said, although it doesn't feel like it in Homer when you're reading it. But, you know, these are very small kingdoms. Then by the time you get to the classical period, the term for king has, for the most part, become basileus. You do get a reflex of this in Linear B, guatireus or guatireweos, something like that, which doesn't mean king, it means something like a local governor or an official. So it seems like one term replaced the other. However, here it seems to mean king, doesn't it? I mean, we have he's specified as the leader of the people and as king. It's not too much of you don't really get the impression that he's deputizing underneath it. Any other mortal. It seems to be someone in a supreme position of authority. Now, to answer your question, Alex, to my left, I can't remember which Alex is which. This is not pre-Greek. This is probably from the mid-6th century.
No, I mean the word.
The word, the origin of the word. So there isn't a Proto-Indo-European mod for it that has been discerned as of yet, which means that possibly it's this word that's hanging out in the Mediterranean, meaning king, before Indo-European speakers migrate there, whatever it was, 3000, 2500 BC, and then they take it up. The Phrygians are using it here clearly for king, though. Now, this is interesting because what did Hesychius say? Word for king? You remember? In his dictionary we read? Balen. Right? Balen, king in Phrygian. Now, I would like to quickly go to the indirect testimonia and read one other quick example from the indirect testimonia to show you something that seems to be going on here. This is from Aeschylus's play, The Persians, right? This is actually his oldest play. It was written in 472 BC, just about 8 years after the Battle of Salamis. So it's one of the few cases where we have an ancient play that's describing almost contemporary events. And it's essentially this depiction of the fallout that's happening in Persia after the Battle of Salamis. And there's this scene there where the play's chorus, which is made up of Persian elders, they decide the situation is so bad, they want to summon the ghost of King Darius, Xerxes' father, to ask him, what do we do? You know, things are getting so bad in Persia. And in translation, in the Greek, it's the chorus sings as they're resurrecting, or as they're summoning the ghost of Darius. Balen archaios balen iti hiku el tepa akron korumbonoktu krokobapton podos eu marinairon. Basileu diaras halaron pipauskon baske paterakake darian oi. King, our king of old, come forth, draw near, rise to the barrow's topmost point, lift your saffron-dyed sandal, display the crest of your royal tiara. Come forth, O blameless father Darius. But look, the word for king, Alen. Now, Aeschylus was well known for copying like sort of foreign words to sort of give a sort of an ethnic flavor to his characters. And so it seems like this is quite possibly a word that Persians were using for king. Now, we know the Persian Indo-Iranic word for king, and it's not balen, but a very common, very productive Semitic root for king is bull. Bull. B, glottal stop. Bull. Now, Aramaic was one of the official languages of the Persian Empire. They actually use it more than they use Old Persian. So I think what's happened with Hesychius's gloss for the word for king is there's this general confusion that's been happening in the dramatic tradition with Phrygians. Who exactly are the Phrygians? They're those foreign-speaking people we meet when we start going east. We know a lot of them fight for the Persians. You know, they've become the archetypal foreigners, right? Like, kind of like how you'll get a lot of Americans from the United States describe all Latino and Latina people as Mexicans. It's because when you go south from Texas, you enter Mexico, right? It doesn't matter whether they're from Chile or from Ecuador or wherever, right? Let alone Portugal or Spain. I think a similar thing happened to Phrygians early on. We have evidence for this. And what's informing Hesychius's gloss is that the Persians are described in, are depicted as using the word balen in Attic drama, and he's just equating the word for Persian with the word for Phrygian, meaning Eastern foreigner. So whenever we look at Hesychius's glosses to tell us what a Phrygian word is, you've got to remember that he's using the Phrygian word to mean any Eastern foreigner from Anatolia or the Middle East. Sometimes it could be Phrygian, sometimes not. And indeed, as it turns out, the Phrygian word for king is a good old-fashioned, very Greek, even though it's technically pre-Greek, word wanakts, wanaktae in the dative. And I think that's just fascinating. I don't know about you guys, but I think this is a very, very interesting sort of comparison to make between how a 5th century lexicographer thinks Phrygians call their king and what the Phrygians actually called their king. Now, what's the last word we have there? It's a bit cramped. Dias. All right, we have found our verb. Congratulations, this is the first time we're reading an old Phrygian verb. Now, it's a shame Caitlin, our resident expert, featured here because there's something going on with this verb. What's the first sound that we get of the verb? Yeah, an augment. We have clearly here a historic form of the verb with the augment, dias. Let's try and figure out what the stem is. This is an indicative verb, 3rd person singular active. It's probably in the aorist tense, almost definitely, of the stem da. We've met that before. It's the same stem as in adaket, present tense. We don't have the preverb at, so it's just the basic stem da, which we also saw as daket, I believe. And it's this Phrygian reflex of this Proto-Indo-European root dech. Right, dech. Breathy voiced dech. And sorry, that wouldn't have been, that actually would have been dech. Now, dech led to demi, which reads duplication in Greek. So here we don't have any reduplication, and we also don't have that ka infix that we saw in the present in New Phrygian. We just have the stem, and we have an athematic 3rd person singular ending. Notice it's sibilated here. We would perhaps expect a T. This could be a dialectal difference. It could be that in some parts of Phrygia, it underwent lenition from T to S, and in others they kept the T. Note also that finding something like this, the verbal augment, pretty big deal. When we're trying to look at an Indo-European language and figure out what is this language? What is it related to? The augment, for those of us in the room who study Greek, we're like, well, of course there's an augment. But actually, not many Indo-European languages have it. The Indo-Iranian languages do. And that's how we know that the Hellenic and the Indo-Iranian languages probably broke off at about the same time. One was shortly after the other. Although the augment is dropped in most of them. In Vedic Sanskrit, you get it as that. You studied a bit of Sanskrit, didn't you? So some of those weak historic tense stems have that R they add to the beginning, depending on the sandhi. That is a verbal augment in Vedic Sanskrit. Later Sanskrit has mostly regularized the augment to part of a historic stem. It's not really an augment anymore, but it's there in the language, sort of affecting things. It's in Armenian. So again, we have this kind of ongoing similarity between Armenian and Greek. There are connections there. Armenian has an augment. Albanian, that's one. So remember Albanian, it's in this Balkan area, right, where supposedly the Phrygians came from. And Phrygian has it. At least Old Phrygian does, although we do find some of it in New Phrygian too. So this is one of this sort of, I won't go back, but if you remember that family tree page we had early on, right? This is one of the bits of evidence that lets us place Phrygian on that family tree. Now let's quickly read a second one before, we might even get through a third one before we break. And I think philology is tiring work. People need food, right? It burns the calories. Yeah. Now, so I love this because this is, let's read it in translation. Ates archiaeis ake nanogawos bidai wanaktae. Sorry, lawagtae. Same thing. So keen to get to the wanaks. Lawagtae wanaktae edaies. So Ates, son of Archias, Yakonanogawos, the carrier bearer of the Akenan. Would it mean key? Who knows? It's a shame Hesychius doesn't have a gloss for key. For Midas, the leader of the people, the king, placed, here we must infer, and the tithemi in Greek is often used for when you're erecting a monument. You place the monument on the ground. Now,
The teacher of the chisel.
now, well, that's the point, Maria. He probably didn't use the chisel. Who do you think?
The relief carving.
It's a relief carving, but do you think he actually was up there on a 30-foot ladder
I don't know.
with a chisel?
Potters put it on their pots.
Ates gets a patronymic. He's the son of Archias. He's a rich dude who's doing it for the king. And this is a big inscription going along the top here, but side here, we have this little inscription written into the edge. Filled into the edge of the relief.
We've got the picture, we've got the dots on the, what actually looks like the dots on the crosses.
Yeah. I should have I should have included a photo of it. We'll call up a photo before we. And this is what we're reading here. It's the second one. So this is M01B. It's here. It's written vertically alongside. Right. Now let's transcribe it. Try not to look at the apparatus. Because you got to sort of develop your muscles, because there's some later ones which you'll, the first word I'll give away. But anyway, you got to develop your transcription muscles for some of the later texts we'll read. All right. So what have we got here? First word. Baba. A name. This is one of those Alal names I was telling you about. So many Phrygians and Lydians and Lycians are just called Baba. I love it. Baba. What have we got next? Memewise. So here we have another patronymic. Baba, Memewise, Baba, the son of Mem. What's the next word? Roitavos. Nominative, grammatic noun, clearly describing what Baba is. Could be from the Proto-Indo-European verbal root, chei, and a preverb, pro. So it would be a bit like a noun form that's cognate the Greek verb proiemi, which means to send forth, but also it's often used for dispatching soldiers, that sending forth of an army. proieni. So it could be like a military leader or something like that, or just the leader of a worker, a gang of like workmen, something like that. It's a tentative etymology. We don't really know what a proitavos is, but context tells us that it's probably a title or role. Baba. Baba's a proitavos.
Verb proitao.
Yeah, but if you apply the loud.
Sorry, I'm thinking of different. I'm thinking of foitao. That's a different word. Then.
Yeah, and boy.
And of course, all
In
these nouns.
Frisian would be, or, but we would expect a broi. We'd expect something like a broi dawo, something like that. Yeah, so that's why the laut verschiebung is so important. But I like your instincts, and these instincts are good because if you chase down some of these seeming cognates and you got to apply the laut verschiebung to it. Survives the laut verschiebung, you might have an etymology. What's the next word, guys?
So this phi isn't a phi.
It's a
It's a z. It seems to be just a variant form of their z, which is an arrow pointing up. It's the normal form.
That's the arrow.
Dios.
So it is the xiana Veyos. Xiana Veyos. This is no doubt another title. Ooh, we haven't really been able to figure out what it means. So he is a leader of men, of people, of workmen, soldiers, something like that. A xiana Veyos, whatever that means. We have Sikeneman. Here we have one of the cases where the word boundaries can be a bit deceptive because si is actually a demonstrative pronoun. So if you remember semun, our dative singular neuter pronoun, semun, the accusative singular of that same pronoun, Old Phrygian, the accusative singular neuter, but this is si. You can see how the si, the semun, share that stem, which actually comes from a Proto-Indo-European deictic particle, ki, which is the same palatal that you have, for example, in hic, haec, hoc in Latin, but also in Greek ekeinos, and the Hittite, one of the Hittite demonstratives, gash, as well. So that k comes from a Proto-Indo-European palatal deictic particle, meaning this thing.
So is it kind of like a proclitic?
Yeah,
Is that a sense?
and this is one of the bits of evidence that tell us that perhaps this actual word was pronounced proclitically as well. It didn't have its own accent. Yeah. So they probably would have said sikeneman, meaning this keneman. Now, what's a keneman? Well, it's very, you're all over my apparatus. Do we remember the New Phrygian knulman? What was a knulman? Tomb. Very tempting to relate this to knulman somehow, but it's probably a different word because the vocalization is different. One is what we call in the E grade. This one here, keneman. Another one is in the O grade, knulman. But they're probably both derived from the same Indo-European root, ken. It would have meant something like dig or hollow out. From that, we actually get the Greek adjective kenos, meaning empty, and the Sanskrit verb karnati, dig. Well, kenosis, of course, yeah. It always comes back to kenosis. So it's quite possible that knulman comes from like an O grade or a 0 grade, which basically means there's no vocalization, or the vocalization is an O sound form of this root, meaning something like the dug thing, aka a tomb, a site. Keneman comes from the same root, but from an E grade form of it, meaning meaning the hollow thing or the empty space, aka a niche that you hollow out of a rock.
So what was the actual, that wasn't a tomb in this case, was it?
There's no tomb. Yeah, it's just a niche, like incised into the rock face. It's in the shape of the entrance to a tomb, but it's not an actual tomb. Again, note the sort of anthropological cultural similarities with the door frame tomb as well, of Phrygia 800 years later in the New Phrygian period. There's also one of these lovely cases where we have extra linguistic evidence. Why do we have extra linguistic evidence? because it's,
on a monument.
we have a demonstrative, meaning this thing,
Yeah, right.
and it's on something. So whatever the keneman is, it must, exactly, whatever the keneman is, logically, it must be the thing we're looking at, the inscription on, which is a niche. So again, we can triangulate between our etymology and just the extra linguistic evidence of looking at the niche. We can see, yes, this is probably, I think this is quite a reliable indication. It's probably a Phrygian word for niche, eneman, in the accusative. Sik eneman is niche. So, and then edias again, made, oops, literally, but probably made. Baba, meme weiss, goitawos, siana we, it was from siana weos, sikeneman edias. Baba, the son of Mem, the leader, the siana weos, this niche. And now I'll quickly show you, do a Google search, what we're reading here, and then we'll break for lunch. Oh, sorry, this is what we're looking for. Monument. Here it is. Thank you. No, I wanted the image, but that's fine. Go to images. There it is. It's massive. It's enormous. Now, we try and get, you can see, so there's people for reference. Yep. So you can see the size of this thing, an enormous amount of work gone into being able to put this thing together.
It's not a very detailed.
Yes, yes.
Shallow.
Now, what we're looking at, the first thing we read is inscribed into the actual rock up the top. And look at what we just read. Down the side here, in a much more humble position in little lettering. Baba. I'll try and get a better image for you, but I have a theory about who Baba is. This is just my theory, but I quite like it. I think that Baba, the Proitawos, I don't know what the other title he had means, but I think the Proitawos is a leader of men, a leader of workmen. Woman, thank you. Exactly right. My theory is that this big inscription up the top by Attis, see how big it is along the top. He paid for it, the son of Archias, right? But then after, and here it is, this is a wonderful photo. Here it is. But then after they built it, the workmen, who of course have the skill set required to actually inscribe the thing, yeah, or perhaps even Baba himself, there it is for your benefit, said, well, you know what, I did all the bloody work, me and my men, so let's put that in there. And note how wonderfully it's inscribed too. It survives so vividly. Note as well that Attis, very ancient name. Literally, we have Hattic people with this name that predate the Hittite incursion into Anatolia. Very ancient name, aka very posh name. Son of Archias. So he's the son of a Greek, but presumably a Greek has made it over to Phrygia at this period because he's probably a very wealthy, perhaps a merchant or a warlord or something like that. Ates, son of Archias, is probably quite high up. Baba, I'm sorry, but if your name is Baba, I just don't think that you're a very important person, politically speaking. Anyway, like I said, this is my
showing through the.
This is my interpretation, but I like to think that this is just a local Phrygian. He's probably a very, very accomplished craftsperson. Has become even the royal, like, head of, royal foreman. But I think what we're seeing here is not part of the original monument. It's an afterthought. It's a bit of a lower class self-expression. Anyway, this is my interpretation. You don't have to consent to it by any means, but
He also didn't dedicate it to Midas, he just did it.
Yeah, exactly.
He has done it for.
Well, and the form Midas is very important because the whole idea is that you're honoring the king, So in the final seconds, I just want you to sit with that, think about how cool it is. In my opinion, it's really cool. I hope you agree. You don't have to. But And think about the fact that what we're looking at, we can read it now because we've done some philological work on Phrygian. We know what it means. You know how I said before that there aren't any characters, Phrygian characters, from the Persian Wars or anything, like Gyges, although he was before the Persian War, or whomever, that are really famous, right? Phrygians kind of remain anonymous. But then here we have Midas himself, referred to on an inscription, and not only Midas, but Baba. So this is why I think Phrygian is so wonderful. That's it. We're going to break for an hour. We're going to take an hour to have a proper lunch break. And just a quick précis of what we're going to do next. I have more short little old Phrygian inscriptions to go over. I might even have to skip one or two, or perhaps not, because then these are all quite short, as you can see. Then we have at the very end, the Vezirhan Stele. And we're potentially, if we have time, going to try and tackle this monster of an old Phrygian inscription, which, would you believe, philologically, we're at a point now where we understand about 90% of it. And there's syntax, there's clauses, I've put commas in, I've put full stops in because we know now. Anyway, that's what we'll do after the break, but fuel up, because philology is tiring. All right, thank you, everyone. See you soon. Be back in an hour at 2 o'clock.